Hello chess friends and welcome to Zadov's Chess channel and welcome to the chess.com Speed Chess Championship in 2020. Today a very interesting match game. It's Levon Aronian versus Jan Nepomniachtchi. Both of these players great tacticians. I really love to watch their games with great tactics, with great opening preparations, with great sidelines of particular openings, with new novelties in openings. I think it's also very important to recognize because both of them are trying really hard in the opening preparations. And today basically they played two openings. So from white perspective, Levon Aronian tried the Alpin variation. Jan Nepomniachtchi with the white piece tried most of the times the so-called Nimzo-Larsen attack. So who was more successful, I will of course reveal it at the end of the video, but first we are going to analyze one game. It was a game in which Levon played with the white pieces, and here he opened with the move e4, and as I said, the Alpin was played after c5, knight to f3, d6, c3. So the main idea of the Alpin is of course the d4 pawn breakthrough. We want to do that when we get our pawn on d4, then we have a very nice pawn section control, and we're controlling then 4 squares on the other side of the board. So knight to f6, we have bishop to e2. Taking the pawn is not a possibility. You get a nice tactic, queen to a4, and you lose the knight. So that's why g6, going into a dragon Sicilian setup here by Nepomniachtchi, and we have castling by Aronian. Bishop to g7, d3. d4 is not possible now because c takes d4, knight c takes d4. Now knight to e4 could happen because queen to a4 doesn't work anymore. You have lost the connection between the a4 square and the e4 square. So far it's not possible to be very aggressive with the move d4. So that's why d3 played by Aronian. We have castling, and now bishop to e3. So you may ask yourself the question, why didn't Nepo, this wasn't playing the game, why didn't play Nepo the move knight to g4, chasing the bishop a little bit? It's not a problem. I think white can simply proceed with the move bishop to f4, and the bishop is still active on this square. e5 is, I think, doesn't bring you so much, although you're getting a new tempo on the bishop, but you can basically choose wherever you go, it's perfectly fine. Bishop to g5 5 is fine, bishop to d2 is fine, even bishop to c1. I even like the idea bishop to c1, staying with this bishop on the long diagonal where it isn't of course an object of your opponent's attacks. But now we could search knight to d2, then maybe knight to c4, knight to e3, and then some knight to d5 outpost, because when you play the move e5 you have left also some spaces behind. So that's why these are the tiny little things in openings what you shouldn't miss. So knight to g4, as I said, it seems like an aggressive idea because your opponent has placed the bishop there, but it's simply not a problem here for white. So knight to c6, we have knight to d2, and now b5. And this is very aggressive line by Nepo. What we should notice always when you ask yourself, where should I attack in chess? Most of the times the pawn structure is showing us the direction of the attack. For instance, here the black's pawn structure e7, d6, c5, the pawn chain is showing us that we should probably make progress here on the queen side. On the other hand, this pawn structure d3, e4 is also showing us the white's direction of the attack. So that's why white should maybe make progress with potential f4 pawn breakthroughs if the position allows it. So far it's not possible, but when you ask yourself the question, where should I make progress, I think it's obvious because of this pawn structure. So b5, we have h3, b4, and now d4 finally by Levon Aronian. And now he finally gets his main goal, this pawn center control with these two very active pawns in the center. Now the knight on d2 is protecting the pawn on e4, so that's why it's possible. Knight to d7, and we have now d5. B takes c3 doesn't bring you so much, although it's an attack against the knight, but we can take of course this knight. If you take this knight, then we simply take another piece and it's game over. If you take here after d takes c6, if you take the pawn, we can simply play rook to b1. Okay, black can escape with the knight, but we have now 4 pieces against 3 minor pieces of blacks, and again it's winning for white. So that's why after move d5, knight to e5, what we can notice about this move, although it's a very nice and active centralized knight, it blocks out also the long diagonal for the bishop. The main strength of blacks in the dragon Sicilian setups is of course the long diagonal on g7 and to a1. Very important move to recognize, because now Levon Aronian simply traded off the knight to e5, and we have now c takes b4. After c takes b4, we can notice that the pawn structure is symmetrical. So we have now 2 pawns here on the queen side, 2 centralized pawns, and 3 maybe here on the king side. And the problem is now that black doesn't love this position, because what we wanted to do is create maybe an asymmetrical pawn structure here on the queen side, where we could make some kind of progress with our pawn. Now when the pawn structure is symmetrical, it's not so easy to make something out of this bishop. First of all, this knight still stands in the way, and now I think Levon Aronian has prepared this line very well, because he had good success in the match game against Nepo in this elephant variation. I think this Nimzo Larsen attack that Nepo tried with the white pieces, I think Levon Aronian handled it very good. Now a3, simply tracking the position on the queen side, and still this bishop is not doing so much as we love to do here from black's perspective. We have b takes a3, and now rook to a3. First of all, we got out of the range of the bishop, because now we can play much freely with our b pawn, and also we have a double attack here on the weak pawn on a7. Now it's suddenly that it seems to me that black has lost a little bit the battle on the queen side, where basically black should be better, as we could notice that Nepo had really the advantage with the move b5, but here Levon Aronian really found good ways how to escape from this, and now it's suddenly black on the defensive side here on the queen side has to play here the move a5 in order to protect everything, and now b4. You see, you still don't have here the connection between the queen and the rook, so taking out is not a possibility. The tension is here on the a file, and now bishop to b7, and now b5. Very important move. Still, this pawn on a5 is a weakness. I think we have solved our problems here with this pawn. Taking out the pawn is not so good, because we can simply take after trades of pieces. You're inviting basically your opponent's queen into the game. The queen is now very active, and I think this should be a drawish line. So, but b5 brings, I think, more complex ideas for both sides in the game. Still, the a5 pawn is a weakness. Also, the b5 of white could be maybe a long-term weakness, but so far I think this pawn on a5 is much weaker, because this pawn is supported by the bishop. Still, this bishop has also good activity on this diagonal, so maybe it's now time to make progress with the move f4. In the game, Nepo tried f5, a very risky choice. It is, of course, a pawn breakthrough motif, but what you're doing here is you're weakening your pawn structure in front of the king. There are now several light squares that you should notice here in front of black's king. Very risky move. Maybe here queen to d7, in order maybe to connect the rooks and try maybe to battle here on the c file, somehow getting maybe also another square for the knight. But in the game here, as I said, f5 and e takes f5 immediately played by Levon Aronian. Rook to f5 doesn't bring you so much if you want to maybe keep a compact position around the square, because you get f4, kicking away the knight, and now after knight to d7, bishop to g4 is very risky, because if you take rook to d5, you get bishop to e6, the fork, so you will lose the size and material, so you have to retreat. But now still knight to e4, very tricky, and if you try, for instance, knight to f6 to compete, bishop to e6 again, and now knight to g5, also very risky. So you see how you can expose these light square weaknesses after the move f5. Very annoying stuff to handle. So that's why here g takes f5 was played, but now knight to f3, knight takes f3, and now bishop to f3. Okay, let's stop and evaluate the position. First of all, what we could notice is if this game goes into an endgame, then white could have some troubles, because first of all, this bishop is a little bit blocked out by its own pawn. So if the game goes maybe into an endgame with only this bishops on the board and this pawn and maybe the same pawn count, then black could be better. But first of all, as I said, black has here still this light square problems to handle, and now I think after the move queen to d7, here Nepo attacks the pawn on b5. Levon Aronian plays the decisive move bishop to d4, which creates further, I think, weaknesses in front of black's king, because when we started the game, when Nepo started the opening, he had, I think, a good activity with the bishop here, the long diagonal. But now you see there are no pieces here on that side which the black, the dark square bishop can attack. And after the move bishop to d4, Levon Aronian plays, I think, a very important positional idea. He wants to create further weaknesses in front of black's king. Now, as we mentioned, we have already the light square weakness, but after trades of bishops, now the bishop is basically the best defensive piece in front of black's king. It's of course also to notice that black will have also dark square problems. So after queen to b5, okay, Levon sacrificed a pawn here for the initiative. Bishop takes g7, king to g7, and now queen to e1, queen to a1, simply attacking the king. And now king to g8 had to be played again, and now rook to b1. You see how Levon activates the pieces. Now after the move queen to d7, here Aronian had immediately a winning chance with the move bishop to d1, which he missed because the serious threat is the move rook to g3. If you try to escape from this, if you try the move f4, it's not better because you get bishop to g4. That's what I meant. You have light square problems, you have also dark square problems. You don't have so many pawns in front of your king, so now the king is naked. Here, if you retreat somewhere with the queen, maybe queen to d8, bishop to e6, and you see it's already losing here. This bishops and queen activity is simply too much to handle. You could also try maybe, instead of this bishop to d1 here, pardon me, after the move bishop to d1, you could also try maybe bishop to d5 to compete somehow, but again doesn't bring you so much because rook to g3 is simply too much to handle. You have to play king to f7, but now queen to g7 anyway, and now bishop to h5. You see how these pieces would be activated. This wasn't played in the game, but I wanted to show you what happens. You cannot play rook to, king to d8, you will lose your rook on f8. If you try to cover with bishop to f7, it's a nice queen sacrifice with queen to f7, rook to f7, and now rook to g8. You cannot cover with the rook because of the bishop's activity, and it's game over. Really, really nice checkmate that could have happened. So, but here Levon Aronian didn't play the move bishop to d1. He played a more inaccurate move, rook takes a5. It's not that after this move Levon loses the game. It's just simply a worse move. Still, the evaluation is much, much better for white, but I think this bishop to d1 would be game over. And it's incredible, I think, how Nepo didn't react correctly to this Alapin variation. He was already in troubles after 15 moves, and I have never seen that top grandmasters are getting out of good openings in only 15 moves. They're very, very well prepared in particular lines. So in move 15, Nepo was already in troubles. Here we are in move 25, and it's again a better position for Aronian. Here rook takes a5, queen to a5, rook to c8 was played, and now queen to d2. Again, what we want to do is, of course, attack the dark squares combined with the bishop. Again, maybe try something like rook to b3, rook to g3, getting all of our three pieces in front of black's king, and it, I think, game over. In the game rook to f8, you have to bring some pieces into the defense, of course. Queen to g5, king to h8, and now rook to e1, attacking also the weak pawn on e7. Rook to f7, and now h4. Very, very important move by Aronian. h5, h6, and then also maybe to search different paths for the queen and attack again the dark square weaknesses in black's position. In the game rook to g7, queen to f4. Very important to stay with your queen on dark squares. Whenever you're attacking with the bishop and the queen, you want to attack with the queens on this opposite colors because we have a light square bishop. Then of course you want to stay with your queens on dark squares. That's very important. You don't want to play something like queen to h5. Then you have the same the queen and the bishop on attacking the same square. So that's why queen to f4, staying with an attack on the dark squares. Also trying maybe now queen to d4 ideas, and then h5, h6. So in the game queen to c8, we have h5, queen to c3 attacking the rook, rook to b1, and now queen to c8. Here maybe bishop to a6 slightly better. After something like h6, still this is protectable. Maybe you can lose a pawn, that's the problem. But here bishop to d3 forces maybe a simplified line. After bishop to e4, queen to e4, and now queen to d2 maybe is playable for black. But in the game queen to c8 was played. Here Nepo was a little bit scared about this activity and also tried to protect his weak pawn on f5. And in the game h6 anyway played by Aronian, we have rook to g6, and now bishop to h5 attacking the rook. And now Nepo tried here a counterattack because he noticed that after the move e5, after en passant d takes e6 that was played in the game, that the g2 pawn is weak, but it's really not a problem. Here after rook to g2, Aronian simply escapes with king to f1, and now the game is still losing for black, although you have created this very important check, but you don't have further good checks. You cannot play queen to c4, the queen is protecting that square. You cannot play bishop to a6 because you lose your rook on g2. So in the game, bishop to e4 was played, and now it's already a losing game again, as I said, for black, because white missed here, Levon Aronian missed here winning sequence, forced checkmate in 7, because he should have proceeded with the move queen to d6 after something like rook to g1, or maybe queen to c4. It's not a problem, we can still cover with bishop to e2, and again you have some backward problems, the queen is hanging, and again it's game over. But in the game, Aronian tried e7, proceed with the pawn, also threatening the promotion here to e8. It's again not a problem that this move loses, it's just a problem that it's slightly worse than this other continuation, so he had again a winning chance. And now rook to g8 played by Nepo. We have a queen to c1, attacking the queen, and here Levon makes a new mistake, which I think brings now back to life Jan Nepomniachtchi, because Nepo played first the accurate move, bishop to d3, and now king to e1 was played. If you try bishop to e2, here bishop takes e2, queen, now queen to e6 is, I think, even a draw. So Levon Aronian had like plus 12 here the evaluation, now it's 0.0. So this move queen to c1 was not a good move. Instead of this queen to c1, he should have proceeded with queen to d2, where he could again prevent this idea to deliver this checkmate, this check on d3, and now still threatening this very annoying move queen to d4, and again it's winning here for white. But he made, as I said, the mistake. Queen to c1 gives now opportunities here for Nepo. King to e1, rook to g1, and now king to e2. Rook to g1, again also mistake by Nepo, because he should have proceeded again with the move queen to e6. That's the most important thing. And after king to d2, maybe we can take, and now queen to c3, maybe here we can trade some more pieces, and this should be probably a drawish line, although black has one pawn up, but I think you can make a draw by here never allow this king to escape here. Maybe play something like a bishop to f7, never allow this king to come out, simply blocking the position with the move king to d4, and it should be a draw. But rook to g1 is a mistake, because of course we have now king to d2, and we are hiding now behind our opponent's bishop here. Rook takes c1, we have rook takes c1, and now after bishop to c4 we have the promotion, and it's game over here after bishop takes e8, bishop to e6, bishop to h5, king to g8, and here after a couple moves here Jan Nepomniachtchi resigned. So okay, this was one game. In the match game, Levon Aronian won the match game with a clear result. He was simply better in the match game against Nepo. He, as I said, played most of the times this Alpine variation, outplayed many times Nepo in this particular line. Nepo didn't find good counterattack ideas. Made several opening mistakes, and on the other hand, I think Aronian handled this Nimzo Larsen attack that Nepo tried many times much easier, and Levon Aronian deserves now his next round. He's in top shape, very nice opening preparation that he's here. Maybe he's missing some tactics, but these are of course blitz bullet games, you can miss some tactics. Still, you see Nepo missed also some counterattacks, so it's of course a very intense tempo. So I'm looking forward, of course, to watch Levon Aronian's further progress in the tournament. I think he has really good chances, as he's also one of my favorite grandmasters these days. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed this game. Really interesting Alpine line by Levon Aronian. If you want to see more games from this tournament, check out my playlist that I've created so far. Here's the link. And if you want to see maybe some other games, the best chess games of all times, and my commented chess games played by computers, you can also check them out. And if you like this content, you can also subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.